Hi, this is Raymond Rodriguez and you are watching Carnival 24. Now, if you've been following the Carnival 24 channel for the last few weeks, then you'll probably be aware of a few of our videos discussing the GI or Geographical Indication for Barbados rum and everything that's happened so far. Now, here in the Carnival 24 offices, we believe this is a huge subject that needs to be discussed at all levels, whether it's government level, rum industry level, rum enthusiast level, or even just the general population that love the island of Barbados and the rum that it produces. Why? Because the GI issue is not just about rum, and unfortunately many people don't know why GI is so important. What's it actually about? It affects international trade, cultural heritage, traditional methods of production and natural resources, creates and maintains a type and quality of rum that can only be achieved on the island of Barbados, it transforms the island's quality product into an international quality brand, and it contributes positively to sustainability and the development of Barbados and the Caribbean. What makes GI most important to the rum producers and to Barbadian exports is that it's an assurance to the Barbados brand in rum. The distillation process, the flavour, consistency and high quality, but most of all it ensures that Barbados as an island benefits through its rum GI. The GI is the lifeline not just of the Barbadian rum industry, but also all of its associated Barbadian industries, including the farmers and the employees that make the rum industry possible on the island. A poor GI agreement endangers the finely tuned trade and financial ecosystems that are heavily dependent on the cooperation of the many and not the few. As far as the mainstream media are concerned, the Barbados rum industry GI is not a priority at the moment. But when it is raised, the language used to explain the topic is riddled with industry legal terminology and language that makes the information unclear to the average person. So, unless you're in the know, you won't know how serious the situation is and the implications it could have for Barbados and its economy. So, if you want more people to know about the GI rum issue in Barbados, and you want Barbadian rum and Caribbean exports to be protected, what we'd like you to do is share this video and the rest to follow as much as possible with all of the people that you know, even if they just have a love of Barbados or they have a love of rum. Share it so people can be educated and have a greater awareness, as we believe the only way to resolve the situation is to create as much transparency with the public as possible in regards to what Barbados GI really means and its far-reaching effects. During our time investigating the Barbadian Rum GI issue, Garvey Campbell had the pleasure of interviewing Richard Seal, who is the CEO and master distiller for 𝗿 Rum and is one of the 4 distilleries on the island of Barbados. We're happy to say that the interview provides a much clearer picture of the GI situation. Now, the original interview was 2 hours long. What we decided to do is post the first half hour because we weren't sure how many of you would prefer to watch or listen to the interview as a single 2-hour video, or maybe just the edited highlights of the interview. So we really decided that it was a case of going with the first half hour and see how you guys felt about it. So if you are interested in watching the rest of the video, then leave us a like and leave us a comment basically saying more please or hell yeah, and if we get enough requests, then what we'll do is we will get onto our team to continue their work editing the video in 30-minute segments, and we'll drop the video in 30-minute slots over the next week and a half. But now, without further ado, here's the first part of our interview with Mr. Richard Seal. This is Raymond Rodriguez and you are watching Carnival 24.
Hi, this is Garvey Campbell and you are watching Carnival 24. And in this interview, we have Richard Seal as a guest to discuss Barbadian rum and geographical indication. Now, Richard Seal is the CEO of 𝗿 Rum and he was born and raised in Barbados. And as the great-grandson of the original Reginald Leon Seal, who founded R.L. Seal & Co. in 1926, he was literally born into the rum-making business. Now, R.L. Seal & Co. has owned and operated various rum brands throughout the years, with Richard Seal ultimately building the 𝗿 distillery in Barbados in 1996 in order to handle their expanding business. And it carries the slogan, "We do it right." Now today, Richard Seal serves as the CEO and master distiller of the R.L. Seal and 𝗿 distillery, one of the only independent rum producers in the world. And under Richard's leadership, 𝗿 Rum has gained international recognition as one of the world's most premium rums. From the caption on his Facebook, which literally says, "I make rum," through to the numerous interesting articles sprinkled across the internet, Richard has an aversion to preamble or spin, and very much comes across as an advocate for transparency and the purity of spirit. His mantra is drink what you like, but know what you're drinking. Richard Seal, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Now, for those who are watching this, if you're not aware of it, we released a very short video that drew attention to geographical indication in Barbados, which generated some discussion about the authenticity of rum in Barbados. And we were contacted by Maison Ferrand about the video, who at the time said that the 60-second video was inaccurate. Now, when Maison Ferrand reached out to us, they didn't really answer any of our questions, so we were left in a position where we have to speculate and get possible answers from other sources. So, Richard, that's why we're really grateful that you've put aside the time for this interview, because you're one of the distillery owners who have first-hand knowledge of the debate surrounding GI and what the Barbadian government proposed. So, before we take a deep dive into it, I have a first question for you. We already know the answer to this, but I think it will give the audience a very good idea of where you're coming from. And that is, can you tell us why you are not a fan of vodka?
Well, oh my goodness, you really put me on the spot on that one. I think, you know, it comes back a little bit to how spirits are made. So in the world of distilled spirits, spirits like rum and brandy and whiskey and tequila, they derive their flavor from the raw material. And then there's the other two spirits, which is they stand out, and that's gin and vodka. And in the case of gin, their flavor is exogenous, so it's added in, so it's that juniper flavor. And now today is loads of botanicals that are added or whatever, but juniper has to be the sort of essential characteristic. But basically, most of the vodka you see sold out there is just distilled pure alcohol. It's just alcohol with another name. It's just has no age. It's a generic product. All of its value is really in the brand. It's a mass produced. Yeah, I mean, if you're paying premium for vodka, you're being robbed. Generally, I'll be careful. I mean, what happens, like anything else, there's a few spin-offs and there are some craft vodkas out there. People are trying to do something with a little more, you know, savoir-faire, but generally speaking, yeah, vodka's a pretty sort of, it's a rubbish product.
It was interesting. I mean, I've drunk vodka before, but reading the article where we first discovered that about you, I mean, my eyes were opened. I've drunk vodka before, as well as many other spirits. But actually, looking at the way you described it, it really opened my eyes to the fact that actually, if we're talking about what brings value to a product, it's very much a manufactured product. There's not much differentiation between.
Yeah, I mean, basically, what vodka does is it steals the quality and skill and artisanal nature of those other spirits and passes it on to this mass-produced product. So we grow up in the culture of spirits where we think of rum making and brandy making and whiskey making as artisanal skill practices, and they are. And we think of, aged brandies and vodkas and aged rums as being, rare and valuable, and the values come from the time. And of course, when you're talking about aged product, you're talking about a finite quantity. Mm-hmm. So, when someone pays a lot of money for a 40-year-old whiskey or a 20-year-old rum, it's because there's a finite quantity out there. Vodka is just mass produced. So what it does is, they say, it takes that intrinsic value that we associate with the distilled spirit category and places it on a product that really has no intrinsic value whatsoever.
Okay, well, that should, if that doesn't give anyone an idea of where you're coming from, I mean, authenticity plays a big part in a lot of the articles that we've read that are written by you. So with that I think sets up our next question, and this really is more for the members of our audience who are really like casual drinkers. They drink rum when they go out to clubs, bars, parties, things like that. But there's quite a lot of them, quite a lot of us, I have to include myself in that as well, who are actually quite, we're not that knowledgeable about some of the, how it's made, how it's produced, etc. So would you be able to give a very brief overview on how rum is produced?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. A lot of people don't know. I mean, many Barbadians don't necessarily, just because you're from Barbados doesn't automatically make you an expert in how rum is made. And I think too, a lot of people don't know the interlinking between all of the different alcoholic beverages that we drink and the commonality in how they're made. So the first thing, for me to explain rum is really actually I'll explain to you distilled spirits and fermented beverages in general. So if we think of all the alcoholic beverages that we drink, they're broadly in two classes, fermented or distilled. And if we think of fermented spirits, fermented beverages, we'll be thinking of obviously of wine, and we'll be thinking of beer. So, wine is from fermented grapes and beer is from fermented grain. Now, in the case of beer, it doesn't contain sugar in it. So the first thing they do which is part of the brewing process is to cook those starches in the grain and break them down into sugars. Then they ferment. And then the fundamental basic process that takes place in all alcoholic beverages is the fermentation of the sugars to alcohol. So they're naturally present in the grape juice. You ferment it, you get wine. You ferment, now you're broken down sugars in the starch in the grain, and you get beer. Now, the whole other class, the class of distilled beverages, is when we distill those wines and beers. So brandy is distilled wine from grapes. And whiskey is distilled beer from grain. And when you think of rum, we can make two different kinds of wine from sugarcane, broadly speaking. We can make sugarcane wine straight direct from the crushed juice, and the crushed sugarcane juice has sugar in it, and that will ferment and make a sugarcane wine. Or we can take molasses, which also has sugar in it, and ferment that directly. We have to dilute it first and make a molasses wine, or molasses beer, or what is commonly called like a molasses wash. Then when you distill that sugarcane fermented beverage, that's rum. So there's a commonality in how all of these distilled spirits are made, and their first step is always the fermented step. And beer and wine is when we stop there, and distilled spirits are when we take that next step. So as I say, there's a tremendous commonality. And then when you think of brandy, whiskey, and rum, the next step that we do after we distill the fresh spirit, all of which are clear when they come off distill, the next step then is putting them in the cask. And so in all those categories, we put them in the cask for aging, and that's where we end up with our aged whiskey and our aged rums and our aged brandies.
Okay, all right. So that moves me smoothly on to my next question. So what you've described is some of the commonalities with all rum, how it's produced. What would you say separates Barbadian rum from other types of rum? Because that kind of also is part.
So that's a very, very, very interesting question. And if you were to look at rum 200 years ago, you would probably find more commonality in the region. But 19th century is a period of great change, much innovation, evolution of pot stills, introduction of column stills, introduction of cultured yeast, so more efficient and different fermentations. And so then that was, that led to quite a bit of diversity in the rum making. In fact, it's very interesting. The development, for example, of Martinique agricole rum. These are historical developments, and it's very interesting how they are. It's really tied up with your social and economic history. It's sometimes people think it's a kind of a sort of a creative process. Yes, it is a creative process, but it's a kind of a process that responds to changing economic circumstances. Right. And agriculture, for example, is a perfect example of that. So you have this diversion that takes place in the late 19th century. And in fact, it was actually quite interesting because the first time in the UK where they sort of established laws of identity, what is rum, what is whiskey, was a consequence of the 1908 Royal Conference on whiskies and other potable spirits. And Royal Commission, sorry, not conference. And, this is where people don't realize how young this sort of regulation and standards are. And they had in that a debate whether Jamaica rum and Demerara rum were both rum, because by this time there was quite a diversion in how they were made. So Jamaica was all natural fermentation, long fermentation, all pot still. And by this time, Demerara was using cultured yeast, short fermentation, column stills. And in the end, they decided that, yes, they were both rum. But it's just to show you, how a reflection of how diverse things had come and how things that we take for granted today were actually, discussed quite openly. So Barbados diverted at this time as well, influence of these factors, column stills, cultured yeast. So largely the Barbados style of rum is relatively modern, and I say relatively modern, but 100, 120 years ago old. And we just, so this diversion, as I say, took place there. And we tended to sort of branch out to have a style maybe a little lighter, a little more medium-bodied than our sort of Jamaican colleagues. And, it's also very interesting to study, how local culture influences this. How does local culture influence the preferences of certain tastes? Because obviously distillers are going to make what the people want to drink. And yes, the preference of what people want to drink is going to influence back to the distillers what to make. And so you have, you have the arrival, for example, of the column still in the late 19th century. And, it's quite relatively quickly adopted. There's one arrives at Mount Gay in the 20s, and then there's another one arrives in the 30s. So you can see the Barbadians are responding. Now, there are other factors in there. When the column still came in, rum prices came down because it was cheaper to make. So, people can speak with their pockets as well, right? And you're talking about a very, very difficult economic period in Barbados in the early 20th century. So there's all of these factors that go in, all these social economic factors that influence what people drink and the styles they prefer. And so, it's a really fascinating question. And so Barbados has evolved its own style. There are rum enthusiasts out there. You could sort of put a table in front of them and, put a Martinique rum, a Jamaica rum, a Barbados rum, and a Guyana rum. And there are many experts out there, just bam, 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 as easily as, picking off a Bordeaux from a Burgundy, So we definitely have our distinct style. And it's interesting, as I say, to study how the culture and history influenced where we are today. And then when we talk about geographical indications, one of the elements of a geographical link is also considered to be know-how. That's considered to be a local geographical link. When you think, for example, there's a GI for Swiss watches. Now, they're not growing the steel in Switzerland. It's about the know-how. So it's about recognizing that there's a certain know-how that goes into that product, and that's the geographical link. And so that is one of the key geographical links in rum. So, if I grew up in Jamaica, I guarantee you I'd be making Jamaica rum. That's the interesting point. We are a product of our environment and culture.
Okay, so GI now for those people who aren't familiar with GI and geographical indicators, geographical indicators have basically been put in place to protect the products of countries and cultures as well. And it basically ties products that are connected to there and identifies when a product is directly connected to a specific country. And it's done for protection for very good reasons, to stop, obviously, for the IP or for other countries maybe taking the IP and then producing it themselves. So it is a form of protection. There are lots of products that are protected. There are sausages in Germany, cheese from, I believe, there's a cheese from,
lots of cheese.
Lots of cheese. There's so many, but it's an important thing. And what I'd like to find out first is, what would you say makes it such an important issue for Barbados and the Caribbean right now? Because when we looked, we actually found that there's a staggering amount of products in the Caribbean, in Barbados, that, unlike some of our European and United States counterparts, just don't have that protection.
That is correct. Yes. So what is GI? Well, the best way I sort of can explain it, a product that for which you'd want to establish a GI is a product, because what you're saying is that the product is more than the mere location of the factory.
Right.
So if we think of many manufactured products that can have plants all over the world, they are not geographically indicated products. You literally can set up the factory anywhere and put out the identical product. I mean, if I think of beer, there's a Heineken brewery over next door in St. Lucia. There's a Heineken brewery
true.
in Holland. So you can never argue that is a geographically linked product, because you can't make it in two different countries and then say it's geographically linked. So the product has to be made in that location to get its characteristics. That's what a geographically indicated product is. So we say rum is absolutely a geographically indicated product, because we say things like, for example, the Barbados water has an influence on essential characteristics. We say, for example, the natural yeast and bacteria in the environment has an important impact on this characteristics. And we say, when I talk to you about that third step, where you mature that product. So if I was to make two identical barrels of rum, for example, fresh out the still, fill those 2 barrels, or fill 3 barrels, let's say, and I left 1 barrel in Barbados, and I sent 1 barrel just to 140 miles away to Martinique, and then I sent, say, another barrel up to Scotland, and we aged those 3 barrels, and we came back 5 years later, we would have 3 different rums.
Wow.
But only one of them could be de facto a Barbados rum.
Barbadian, right.
Okay.
I even in one presentation I went to, one of the gentlemen who was presenting, I think it was actually Mount Gay rum that he was representing, and he was saying that because of the temperatures in the Caribbean, that when rum ages, I can't remember exactly the terminology using the numbers, but he was basically saying that a rum aged in Barbados, say for 5 years or 10 years, is the equivalent of maybe another category of spirit that is aged for even longer. So actually,
yes. So in basically, maturation is a chemical process, and heat is energy into that process, and so that process is going to go faster in a warmer climate.
Right.
But of course, there are other factors as well. Humidity has a factor as well. And so, and even things, even just the condition of the wind and stuff around, everything has, there's quite a few different influences. And so the point would be is, when you have a product that the geography influences it, you have a product for qualifying for a geographical indication. because you simply can't, you couldn't take my Foursquare factory and reproduce it in another country and get the same product. It would be impossible. You could take all of my equipment, send it in another country, and it will not be the same because I won't have the same water. And, you know, our water that goes into fermentation is completely untreated. Well, it just has a coarse filtration, but it's the, you know, so it has all the natural microflora and microfauna that the underground water has. You know, you won't have the natural environment of the yeast and bacteria that are present in this environment. You wouldn't then, as I say, and then the maturation and climate. And also, unless you literally get a whole bunch of Barbadian stem and grape, you won't have the know-how as well.
Yes.
So that's the first thing to sort of acknowledge, that Barbados rum is a geographically linked product, as is Jamaica rum, as is Demerara rum. So then the question is why would you want to protect it then? Well, that's where it becomes very analogous to a trademark. So obviously we sell products branded Foursquare. My colleagues up north sell products branded Mount Gay, and you invest in your brand, and your brand gains a reputation and it gains a value. Now, what you want to do is you protect your trademark by registration to make sure that in the case of a trademark, only you do it. In other words, it wouldn't matter if somebody built a distillery somewhere else in Barbados and they say they copied me entirely and they matched everything and they bought the same equipment. It wouldn't matter because I own that right. And so Barbados rum now is when you want to get a GI, is when you recognize that your product, or this, not when you recognize, but your product becomes valuable. And so when your product becomes valuable, there's a couple of things you want to make sure. You want to make sure there's nothing done to harm that value. You want to make sure that all of the economic earnings from that come. Because, you know, why would I want to stop someone using a Foursquare trademark? Because they'll be taking some of my income.
Absolutely.
So it's the same way. So you want to make sure that everyone who's using that Barbados rum mark is not doing anything that will harm it, because everyone shares in the value of that mark. And you want to make sure that the economic value that is generating is accrued completely to the island. It's sometimes easy to believe that your product, the success of your product, is solely on your own brand, but the fact is that your category plays a big role. So I know, for example, that I could be the same person, identical person, say in knowledge, but if I didn't grow up in Barbados, if I didn't have the reputation of Barbados rum behind me when I started, if I didn't have the 400 years of credibility and provenance of Barbados rum, I would not be selling not even a tenth of what I sell now. And I'm the same person. Okay. So part of that is because of the provenance of Barbados. That is the shoulder on which I get to stand on when I started. Okay. So not only just, well, as they say, as you mentioned, I'm a family business. So I got the leg up also from my family, but I also get the leg up from the fact that I live and grew up in Barbados.
Barbados.
And so we have to protect that. We have to protect that. Now, when you mention a lot of countries don't have this, you're quite right. I mean, when you think of, I'll give one as a very easy example. So Demerara sugar, for example, is not protected. And, you know, they tried to protect it. And a British High Court back in 19 teens. So it was before 1920, of either 1917, 18, or something like that, ruled that Demerara sugar did not need to come from Demerara. And because Demerara had become a generic word, you can still find today, if you go in certain parts of the US, you can find on the shelves in the US products called Barbados molasses that do not come from Barbados. Because Barbados was, the term Demerara sugar became a generic term to mean vacuum pan sugar, because they were the first to do vacuum pan sugar. And Barbados was very famous back in the day for its molasses. It made a special grade of molasses, which we at home would call fancy molasses. And it was called, outside it was called Barbados molasses. And a lot of our, it's long forgotten today, but many of our closed sugar factories, people don't realize many of them were dedicated solely to making molasses. They didn't make sugar. Yeah.
Wow.
So we were very famous for our molasses, but all of the branding value added took place outside with both sugar and molasses. Any hope to protect those names was long gone and overruled. And so what we're trying to do is to make sure that doesn't happen in rum. In fact, one of the reasons why rum has succeeded where the sugar industry has struggled is basically a bit of good fortune, if you might say, is that rum branded rum. So sugar stayed a commodity, only was a commodity, left the island as a commodity, sold within the island as a commodity. But rums went through merchant blenders, and merchant blenders created brands, and brands create value added. And so you had a situation, and of course, rum lent itself much easier than sugar to add in value through things like blending and aging, where you could add that additional skill onto what might start out as a commodity product. So because rum was able to brand, it has been able to survive. Because let me be clear, we struggle with sugar because Barbados is an expensive place to make sugar. Barbados is also an expensive place to make rum. But you will notice Barbados rum doesn't compete down the bottom shelf.
Yes.
So because we have been able to create this added value product, this great reputable product, this great quality product, we are able to have a viable industry. It doesn't matter that we're a higher cost in Barbados to produce.
We hope you enjoyed the first part of the video with Richard Seale. If you want to see the rest of the interview, where we talk more about rum, its production, and the Barbadian Rum GI issue, then leave a like and a comment telling us more, please. And if we get enough requests, then what we'll do is we'll continue to post these videos in 30-minute chunks so that we can get it out there as much as possible. And don't forget, remember to share this video with people who you know would really be interested in it, and let them know, because we need transparency across the table. This is Raymond Rodriguez, and you have been watching Carnival 24.